All right, cool. So I think we're recording now. I just want to say a quick thanks to everyone who's showing up. And of course, thanks to our speaker tonight, Justin McAfee. He's one of my friends who I work with over at my company. We do incident response together. And Justin's talk tonight is going to be on business email compromise. Super excited to hear it. It's a big thing for sure. So, without further ado, Justin, if you want to take it away, friend.
Mark, you're not going to believe this, dude, but I am 99% positive that my OBS just locked. So give me 2 seconds to bring it back up. Can you guys see me moving?
Nope, you're frozen.
Yep, great. Well, believe it or not, I've used a computer before. Let me see if I can just screen share the old way. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
OBS is coming back up. Let's see if it actually works. All right, can you guys see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. We're just going to roll with this then. Sorry about that. And then I'll grab the recording from you guys at the end. So cool. My name is Justin. I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about business email compromise and about how we can secure the modern workplace. Before we get started, if you guys want to find me online, you can do so on Twitter or on GitHub. I post all of my classes on my GitHub, so if you want to go out there and check them out, there's some on DNS blackholing. There's some on Sysmon tools and on using some of those things and how you can configure them. We have some stuff on Zeek and doing some things with Rita. All kinds of neat stuff as I put together classes. I put them out there. The files are there. The PDFs are there. The slides are there. They're all published under a Creative Commons license, so you're welcome to take it. You can go and modify it however you want to. I don't put the license on saying that you can't make money from it, but I'd ask that you don't, that you go ahead and pay it forward. Keep training up the next generation of people. So you can find me on Twitter and GitHub at I Ain't Shooting Mess. I am a former PSYOP soldier, so I'm super excited to be speaking to the Fort Bragg chapter tonight, since that's our home, right? Currently doing incident response as an analyst for a global food and beverage supplier. So we handle food and beverage delivery on every continent except for Antarctica. But if we can find a way to expand there, I'm sure we will. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and a national park enthusiast. So my wife and I did our honeymoon in Death Valley, and then we spent our 5 year in Yellowstone this year, and we're working on a plan moving forward to be able to work remotely from national parks around the country, thanks to the use of Starlink and things like that. So really excited about that as we move forward into this more remote workforce globally. So what is business email compromise? It's a lot like phishing. A lot of people confuse it with phishing, but it's something a lot more nefarious, and it gives the bad guys a one up on us. And it's phishing emails that exploit an existing trust relationship. So they're not going to send you those spam emails, those spoofed emails, those just goofy emails that say, "Hey, click here to see this," or "Oh, your password's going to be shut off," or whatever weird thing if you don't click here. Instead, these are going to be emails that come in from vendors, from peers, and from customers. And they're going to abuse that trust that already exists between email recipients. Because when you get an email from Bob, and we'll use Bob as our example for most of the evening, when you get an email from Bob at Bob's Tool Shack, you expect Bob to be the creator of that email. And with business email compromise, when you look at it, 99% of the time, it's going to look like all the other emails that Bob sent you before, maybe with just a few key differences. So why do they do this? One, because they're using that implicit trust that already exists between you and the victim, and you potentially becoming the victim, then they're going to have much higher rates of success. In fact, we'll talk about it a little more later, but they actually sell their business email compromises on the number of on the deliverability of the phishing kits that they can create specifically for this type of environment. And they're going to use these to establish footholds in complex environments or more secure environments. So in my work on business email compromises, 90% of the time, the ones that we're the victim of, where we're receiving the emails, are from one of our vendors or customers that's much smaller than us and has a much less secure environment. So what they're doing is they're hitting that low-hanging fruit, those people that we already trust, and then once they're in there, they're going to abuse that implicit trust and start attacking up or trying to establish a foothold up. Any questions? I'll pause and try and make this a little interactive as we go, so it's not just death by PowerPoint. Cool, we'll move on. For characteristics, you'll usually see that the difference in phishing, spoofing, and business email compromise starts off with the number of recipients. With spoofing and phishing, you hit as many people as possible, as broadly as possible, across as many domains as possible, just to see what you can get to hit, right? It's casting a very, very, very wide net and just hoping you scoop stuff up. Business email compromises are actually the opposite of that. They're going to hit a small number of recipients. It's usually going to be relegated to the victim's email, address book, or their previously sent emails, depending on the sophistication of the person sending the emails, right? It's also going to pass, assuming your vendor has them configured or your third party has them configured, it's going to pass DKIM, DMARC, and SPF records. The reason being that they're acting out of your trusted peer's inbox, and since they're acting out of that inbox, there's nothing about that computer that's different than the normal computer that sends you emails. So a lot of the things that we see that would normally set us off or trigger an automated alert to say this is a bad email, these are bad guys trying to do bad things, are not going to happen when this email comes in. It's going to be low volume, and it's going to clear most of our automated checks. To add to that, they'll often use something like previous email bodies, where they'll just take something out of the sent folder, add their malicious URL, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's actually going to come through as a clean URL, but we'll talk about how they do that. They're going to add their malicious content, that clean URL or clean attachment, to that previous email body, and then just send it back to you. So when you get it, it's not even going to be anything weird. If you're used to Bob sending you orders for tools because you're a tool supplier, you're just going to get a new email, maybe a recycled one that says, hey, I need these tools by Wednesday, and then a link to the tools, like Bob usually sends you, right? So it's abusing that trust relationship that's already there. For the clean URLs and clean attachments, what we've seen a lot, probably greater than 90% of the time, is they're going to abuse sites that host documents for people, like DocuSign and like Adobe. Both of these services allow you to host a document to have somebody sign it, and allow you to modify the document once it's been hosted, or to add URLs to it and those kind of things. That's going to be done to stop those automated scanners that would stop and look at the URL. The URL is going to do its assessment. It's going to see that the reputation of DocuSign is really good. The reputation of Adobe is really good. When you go to it, it doesn't pull down any loaders. It doesn't pull down any droppers. There's no malicious scripts there. It just opens a document. And so your email product's 90% of the time going to let it through without any concern. One of the things that you may see that may trigger you, though, if you see it, or that you could build IOCs around or alerting around, is that it often contains a unique URL that's base 64 encoded with the recipient's email. This is really, really cool. I try not to give the threat actors too much credit, but credit where credit's due. There's a really cool phishing kit called Logo Kit that we've been dealing with over the last 6 months probably. And I actually have a sample of it that I pulled from one of our BECs today. And I'm going to try and show you guys a live demo. We'll see if it works. Of the Logo Kit product. Logo Kit base 64 encodes the recipient's email in the UTM data of the URL. So you'll have adobe.com and then the document or whatever. And then once you go to adobe.com, you're going to see the document that the threat actor is hosting. And it'll have a click here to sign or something. That's usually a link to a secondary landing page. And that landing page will be hosting the Logo Kit phishing kit. What Logo Kit does is it actually takes that UTM data, the base 64 encoded recipient email, it breaks off the domain, and it looks up the domain at logo.clearbit.com / the domain name, where the brand name is. And what that allows them to do is when that phishing kit loads, it'll actually pull really high-res, nice versions of your logo, and it'll custom brand the 365 page that pulls up and loads, so that it looks like it's for your site. And the one we have tonight, we'll see we can change that data, the base 64 data, to get it to generate those on the fly as long as it has internet access. Any questions about the characteristics you guys will see as you're researching these? Cool. Hearing none, we'll continue. So there's a couple of different approaches you can take when you're looking at these. We're going to start with talking about being the recipient. And then we'll talk about it from us being the source of these things. Often you'll find out that if you're the recipient of them, you end up being the source of them. And that's just because they're hard to find, and the threat actors usually have a few hours advance notice, and as they're working through the inbox, and you as the incident response personnel are trying to find it and work through it. So starting with the recipient, how do we prepare? One of the biggest ones is going to be to educate our users. Because DMARC, DKIM, and SPF is not going to alert us to these, URL composition is not going to alert us to these, we have to train users on recognizing these and recognizing what they expect and what they don't. I put a note in here about specifically training users on an alternative means of contact. The reason for that is taken from a real life example that I had recently of a business email compromise where we had trained our users really well. So well, in fact, that we'll say Susan, I remember the lady's name, but Susan got an email, and Susan saw the email, and it wasn't time for that user's order yet, or for that customer's order yet. They ordered near the end of the month, and she got this email mid-month, and the email said something like, hey, here's our orders, because it was just a recycle of a previous email, like we expected, and it had a link in it. Susan read it, and she noticed that it was not near the end of the month. It wasn't time to put in an order yet. So she popped the reply button and said, hey, Bob, we don't usually get your orders yet. We're really diligent about not clicking links and those kind of things. IT gives us a hard time about that and trains us a lot on it. They drill us on it all the time. Did you send me this link? And Bob, the threat actor, who's in Bob's email at least, responded back and said, yeah, I did send you the link. That's my orders for this month. Can you go ahead and process it? And Susan said, sure, why not? And she clicked the link. A couple of days later, she gets a call from us and says, hey, Susan, I need to talk to you about some emails between yourself and company X. And she said, that wasn't Bob on the email, was it? And I said, no, ma'am, it wasn't Bob. But what we had failed to do is specifically train our users on an alternative means of contact. So Susan knew Bob. They'd had a relationship for years, a business relationship for years, rather, where she was handling their orders and those kind of things. And she just replied back to him by email like she always does. Even though she knows his voice, she could have called and talked to him on the phone. She could have called one of the main published office numbers and asked to speak to him directly. Any of those kind of things. But we were negligent and didn't include that in our training. And we can't expect users to know what they don't know. And so I wanted to call that out to you guys, the lessons learned from us. Make sure you're training your users on alternative means of contact when they're following up on these kinds of things. Another thing you can do is configure your DMARC, DKIM, and SPF records, and then configure blocks to those. So you should be pushing on your vendors and putting pressure on your vendors and customers and peers and saying, hey, if you're going to send us email, you need to be putting DMARC records out there. You need to be doing DKIM. You need to be filing SPF records because we're going to start dropping mail that doesn't include those. Exchange has the options to not accept those mails. Right now, for business email compromise, this isn't going to help you a lot, but it's one of those things that you're doing that helps knock down a lot of the spoofing, a lot of the other phishing stuff that you just don't need. A cool tool that when I gave this talk previously, somebody pointed out and suggested that I show to future audiences is the MX Toolbox. And so if you go to MX Toolbox, you can actually go in and there's an SPF check and a DMARC checker. You can put in your domain and it'll actually tell you based on your domain whether or not your SPF records are configured correctly. SPF specifically is an IP address record that you list. And basically, when people receive an email from you, they check to see if it's on the SPF list. If it's on the SPF list, then they know to accept the email. If it's not on the SPF list, they'll drop it, right? So you can go out here and fill this out. It'll pull your records and tell you exactly what's configured for your SPF. It's a really fast way to do it. If you don't know how to do this, talk to your email vendor, talk to your DNS vendor, and they can probably help you through this. And then the same thing for DMARC and DKIM. They have tools out here as well. It's all free. Just plug in your information and they'll help you get it up to date. Another one is before you actually end up in this situation where you're receiving these emails or where you're exploited, is go ahead and identify points of contact and any shared access that you have for major partners. So you need to know how to get a hold of these people. I can't tell you how many times that we see one of these email compromises and it's not for one of our established vendors, and we have to go through a long rigmarole process of trying to find an abuse contact or a phone number that we can get a hold of or call somebody, and if they use third party, it just becomes a whole mess. Do yourself a favor and have those points of contact ahead of time. Find out who your major vendors are. Find out who you can contact or who owns that business relationship so that you know who to contact before any of this ever happens. And the second part of that statement is get an agreement to remove. In the next 2 bullet points, we'll talk about executive and leadership tabletops. But when you're getting that agreement to remove, you need to talk to your executives and leadership ahead of time and say, hey, we've identified that vendor X has this connection into our network. We do business with them. And if they get popped, we're going to cut that access. Not we're going to ask you about cutting the access, but as part of our run books, as part of the work that we're doing to keep the company safe, we're going to go ahead and cut that access, because them being down for 15 minutes while we investigate, or a couple of days while we investigate, isn't as bad as the whole company getting ransomwared and then none of us being able to work and all that kind of stuff. Again, you've got to get that buy-in, but if you're an executive at a company or you're a decision maker at a company who can decide that and you're listening to the talk tonight, go ahead and push that down to your incident managers. Get that to somebody who can make that decision to protect the company ahead of time. And then make it easy to report. Make sure that your users have a way, whether it's the phishing button in O365 or another plugin that you've put on or a mailbox they can forward to, make it as easy as possible for users to report when something's weird. Humans are your best sensor in this case, and you've got to make it very low friction for them to report, or they just won't do it, right? You want to get those reports in, you want to get that data in. And then including in executive and leadership tabletops. Make sure that executive and leadership tabletops discuss what's going to happen. How do we notify our vendors if they get popped and we're getting stuff from them? What do we do if we have to cut access from vendor X because they're infected or because they experience? Oftentimes when we deal with executive and leadership tabletops, we're worried about what do we do if we get compromised. We have to flip that script sometimes and say, what happens if our business partners do? What does that mean for us, and how we kind of turtle up and protect ourselves in the meantime? Any questions on preparation or comments? Concerns? Feedback? Burn all the laptops? I like it.
No, I thought it was awesome to highlight, make it easy for the users. I think that's super important.
Thanks, man. Mike, I see your hand up. It looks like, I'm not sure if that's intentional or if you had something to share.
Yeah, I just put it up. I was going to type this all out, but I figured it'd be easier for me to say. So I'm wondering, Justin, how you disambiguate BEC from just hackers owning individual users' boxes, and it especially happens with, you know, the family laptop that goes home, or the user at an enterprise taking their laptop home and letting their kids play on the computer and play games, and it gets malware, and then somebody takes over email accounts on that machine and starts doing the same social engineering. Is there a difference between that and the toolkits that you're talking about that are much more of a high level? This is an attempt at a deep fake almost of email. But,
sure, yeah.
but if you own the email account, that's sending the social engineering, you don't need to deep fake the email account, right?
Right.
You get in and you're controlling the email account. So is there a big difference between the two, attack surfaces?
I don't think so. Where I draw the line for business email compromises, and where I say that it delineates itself from a phish, is that a business email compromise is a type of phish, and it's really hinging on using that trust to maintain the appearance of that relationship and to maintain and continue that trust as you're going forward, with getting the benefits of everything that trust brings, of all the technological pieces of all of it's going to pass all of the automated passes because we talk to this vendor all the time. Even something like composition checking that looks for speech patterns or patterns in emails and those kind of things are usually going to fail on these because they're just going to use recycled sent emails, right?
So in reading about this, and this has been in the news, apparently this is something, new and exciting that everybody is jumping on. So it's BEC has been in the headlines as being used attack, and so apparently the tool set is very sophisticated in that you go through the history of the emails and you collect enough social data on what the previous pattern of emailing is, and then you come up with a scenario where you fit right what your request is to get them to do something fits right in with the previous emails, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The emails that we look at when we go in and look, it almost always depends on user contact and us being able to call the user and say, why is this one weird? Other than the URL, right? Being able to put the URL in a sandbox, pull it up, and you end up on a 365 login page, and you say, okay, well, obviously, it's not a real 365 login page.
So to finish the question, are these malware tools using AI and machine learning to go and do that analysis, or do you think that's a human analysis that goes back and looks at emails and figures out what to add to a train of thought to get a valid looking email?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I've not seen any, in my experience personally, that have been generated with new content. I've almost always been able to take the email and word for word go and find the email that they copied in order to send that.
Okay, so they used the copy to start the deep fake.
Yeah, the conversation that's occurring is usually a replica of a previous email just copy pasted.
Because I assume you're aware of like the Google's toolkit for taking a few words of some previous conversation and inserting it and having the computer generate a deep fake of a conversation, right? The natural language deep fake.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the natural language models and their ability to decide and detect speech patterns and replicate those speech patterns. Yeah. I haven't seen anything to suppose that any of the threat actors I've dealt with were that sophisticated, but I wouldn't put it past them. If there was a way to get that, if there was a way to make that more consumable, get it onto a GitHub page or something like that, then I believe it could be done. I think where the restriction is now, those language models, for the most part, need an overwhelming amount of data to be able to train them accurately. And so I would be hesitant, if I were the threat actor, to use one of those when I could just do it the hard way. Also, a lot of these threat actors are using just like the same call center scam people in Calcutta or wherever they are, right?
Right.
Human capital is cheap, when you're looking at the amount of money they can make and the amount that it costs them to outsource. So they can say, hey, take this mailbox, find all the emails to Bob's Tool Shack, and then replicate one of them and send it to those people. Takes them a couple minutes to do. They put their links in and they're good to go and they're off to the races. No ML, no AI, they're ready to go.
Hey, thanks for the great answers, and sorry to derail your presentation intermittently here. I'll shut the heck up now.
Not at all. I really want this to be interactive. I don't want to sit here and I don't want you guys hearing the same stuff you've already heard, and I don't want to make this not valuable for you guys. I know this stuff, right? That's why I wrote the class. So I want you guys to know this stuff. And if you already know it, let's talk about how we get better at finding it and get better at getting rid of it. Let's see. Nate, I can see the chat pop up sometimes, but I can't actually see the chat. Let me see if there's a way to make it visible to me.
I got you.
Presenting.
He said something we have observed in the threat actors may be patient and wait weeks or months to find the right opportunity to try and take advantage of the compromise and engage with the external party. Example, waiting for the quarterly shipping invoice or search for wire instruction emails.
Yeah, absolutely. If the mailbox has the history and has enough content in there, they're absolutely going to mine through it and find like the right time. And we've seen dwell times on these last quite a bit, where the threat actors set themselves up to only visit the mailbox every now and then, or to only look for certain words. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but one of the things I've seen them do is set up forwarding rules where they say if the email contains this content, then forward a copy to this other email address, which may be popped or it may be just like a random Gmail or Yahoo account or something. But basically what they're doing is they're setting alerts for themselves and saying, hey, if the email's primed, if the conversation's right, if it's time to talk, let me jump in and start using that mailbox, right? So we'll talk about that as one of our identification steps later. You can literally just start building rules to look for forwarding rules and then, look for that. Do standard business tools make it easier for the hacker? I'm sorry, Mike, I don't understand the standard business tools. I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
Oh, looking for a particular invoice or quarterly report or whatever. If everybody, all the businesses at the enterprise level are using Microsoft toolset, then you know what data is being transacted, right? And you know what the the ETL or the various formats of the data being transacted in emails is going to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so kits that they're using, the commodity kits that they're using, are literally just off-the-shelf kits. They get them down. There's minimal configuration. They throw it up on a web server, and they're ready to go. The only ones that I've seen that do a good job of taking into account is there's one phishing kit. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but what they did, instead of just throwing up a 365 page, because everybody may not be using 365, it actually throws up a page and says sign in with, and assuming you guys can see me on camera, but it'll say sign in with, and then say like sign in with Outlook or sign in with Gmail or sign in with whatever. And what they did is they wrote a script that goes behind that, and when you type in the email address, if you click the Gmail button, you have to use an @Gmail extension. If you click, depending on which ones you click, there's different regex behind it that makes sure you're not putting in nonsense values. And so, for the most part, though, most people are hitting 365 because that's the one that most people are going to be using in a business environment. Definitely not using 365. So let's talk about how you identify these. We already talked about that they're hard to do. I got some great advice from a peer today as we were going through the class and looking at updating everything. And he said, know your best sensors and know who your sensors are with the highest fidelity. So you're probably doing phishing exercises internally to your company. Look and see, work with your phishing people and look with your training people and see who's really, really good at being one of those sensors. Who always picks out the phishing emails and like can get them every time. And then to add on to that with the highest fidelity, I don't care if they always get all the phishing ones if they report 500 emails a week, right? I'm not impressed if you can pick out the 12 phishing emails out of 500 emails. But if you gave them 10 phishing tests and they submitted 12 documents, those 10 you can go ahead and mark off, right? Because those were the 10 that you sent them. But those 2 are probably really important. It's probably time to start looking at those. I can tell you right now for a fact, for the bet of a beer, that I can ask Mark, and I'll ask him not to name the person, but Mark and I work together, and I can guarantee you Mark knows who our worst censor is. There's a user that we get like hundreds of emails from reporting phishes, and they're never right. They're almost always junk, right? But then there's those other users who always hit all the phishing tests, and then when they report something or they hit me up on IM or they give me a phone call, I know something's bad because they're on it, right? So know who your people are, build those relationships, trust those people, and work with them, right? These are always going to look like legitimate emails almost. So when you're identifying these, one of the things that I do that I'll show you at the end is use Burp Suite. We always pull the legitimate email, or the legitimate email, into Burp Suite, and we use it to assess the email because Burp Suite has the intercept proxy. And the intercept proxy will allow you to actually step through GET and POST requests so that you can control what is and isn't sent to the attacker's infrastructure. This is super nice because when you load the phish up, you can actually step through each pull or each GET and see where they're pulling each piece and what infrastructure they own and what they're just pulling from like the ClearNet in general. Also, when you go to submit credentials into it, and it's the only time I'm ever going to tell you to submit credentials into a credential harvester, but when you submit credentials into the credential harvester, as long as your intercept is on, you can see where it's going to post those credentials to. And then drop them. You don't actually submit them, obviously. The reason we do that is because a lot of times threat actors will have a place where they're consuming all the credentials, some infrastructure that they've got a hold of that they're sending all the credentials to, and then they've got hundreds of phishing kits deployed out across the internet, across WordPress sites that they've exploited and those kind of things. The idea being that if one of their credential harvesters gets taken down, that's not really a big deal because they have 99 more. So what we want to look for and target is the place where all of those are sending the credentials. If you're a threat hunter or you have threat hunters, this is also super valuable for them because if you can say, hey, the last 100 phishing kits all sent credentials to the same place, then all of a sudden you've got that IOC that ties all those other ones together, and you can start building out TTPs, you can start building out profiles around your threat actors and saying, hey, these people look like they're very specifically and consistently targeting us and our vendors. There's something else there that's cool with Maltego that I don't have the time to show you guys tonight, but you can do the same with Maltego, where if you put all your indicators of compromise in and allow Maltego to start to join and graph those things together, you'll naturally get these circles that form in your graph, and you can almost always identify a business email compromise because it'll have these nice little circles on the graph of interconnection where the vendors are sharing, or where the threat actors are sharing the back-end infrastructure, and you can see where they've hit your vendors or your customers, and then those vendors and customers, after they got exploited, started trying to hit your organization. It's really cool stuff to play with. Another thing we're going to do identification is using outlier or needle in the haystack methodology. If you think back to who coordinates with your vendors in a large company or even in a small one, it's usually one of two people coordinating with a vendor, right? You usually don't have a lot of traffic between a vendor or a customer and somebody else. It's usually their main salesperson or the main person who owns that business relationship. And there'll be a large amount of email between them. Well, if you go and start looking and you start sorting it, especially if you're using Custo in advanced hunting or something like that, you can take and start doing counts and say, give me all the times when my vendor has spoken to one of my employees or one of my peers or customers or whatever you call your users, right? Give me all the times when this vendor's spoken to these users, and you'll start to see that threat actors don't really pay attention to that. They'll usually just look at who all's talking to that vendor or who at the vendor they're talking to, and they'll send emails to them. So what I generally see when I do this kind of analysis is I'll see Bob emails Susan 150 times, right? Bob emails Tom 100 times, and then Bob emails John once, and it's the phishing email. And you can start to build these queries because the threat actor didn't know not to include John because he's looking for the people that's been emailed there. And they don't usually take that level of granularity. So it's an easy way for us to stop and say, hey, look, that looks weird. You can pre-build those queries in Kusto or Splunk or whatever you're using to do your SIM, and then start running those reports on the regular, right? There's going to be some noise in it, but it's going to give you an opportunity to stop and start doing some threat hunting and looking for those things, even if your human sensors aren't the best. I just saw Mike's question, does using PKI and crypto everywhere and a zero trust model solve this problem completely? Not at all. Absolutely not. The zero trust model breaks down here because in order to do email, you have to have some trust in general, right? Email has an implicit trust built in because you're accepting email from just about anywhere. And DKIM and DMARC and SPF endeavor to solve that problem, but they actually can't because in this effort, if somebody has your SSH key, equivalent to your DKIM keys, if somebody has your SSH key and they call the server, they're effectively you for authentication and authorization purposes. It's the same way. Once the threat actor gets a hold of a mailbox that has that implicit trust, even if all the security pieces are in place, those emails are still going to look legitimate. So is it really, you have to rely on your users or be willing to do this needle in the haystack to start digging through stuff. And then as you're getting these emails and you're identifying them, you need to start looking to see if your users were exploited and start pivoting. There's a business decision here that has to be made of, do I stop the bad emails that are coming in now, or do I stop the bad emails that are going out? In my opinion, it's time to shift and stop and start looking at the emails that are going out, because you're going to be liable, possibly liable because of contractual agreements or because of legal reasons, depending on where you live and where you do business and where you conduct business. You're going to be responsible if your infrastructure is sending out malicious content, whereas I've never seen anybody get in trouble for receiving malicious content from a contractual standpoint or from a legal standpoint. So it's time to stop. If you've been exploited in the process or your user gave up credentials, it's time to pivot and start looking around. Also, that sandbox credential is going to be, or the sandbox IOC that we talked about earlier, is going to be the most important IOC that determines whether or not your users were exploited. The reason being is users will lots of times click on stuff, and we can see this in the logs, and they see that it's bad or weird, and they close it and they go away from it, but they never report it. Instead, what you want to look for is that credential actually being passed back to that credential storage place, that central place, because then you can start checking your network logs for anybody else who's visited that and any other traffic that went to there. That's almost a 100% indicator that your user gave over their credentials to the bad guy. If you're checking the actual credential collection point. I don't think I've ever worked one where we had traffic to the credential collection and the user hadn't given up their credentials. They may have lied and said they hadn't, but then later the threat actor would try and log in with it. So, Craig, we appreciate you coming, man. Appreciate you being here. We've got this on a recording, so we'll obviously get a copy of it to you after the fact, and appreciate your time tonight. Any questions or comments on Identify? Go on to contain. Contain's easy. You guys know this part. If you're doing containment, quarantine the emails, block the senders, block the sender domain, gather your IOCs, and contact the source. This is the big one. The other one's quarantine, block. You guys know that stuff. That's phishing stuff. We do it all the time. Gather your IOCs and contact the source. When we go to contact the source, this may be the worst day of their life, or their professional life so far. Depending on what they've worked before, depending on how much infrastructure they have, a lot of the times we're calling smaller companies, and those smaller companies are going to have less resources and a less mature environment. I love that, Mark, that they know of. Yeah, it's the worst one that they know of. Or the Homer Simpson meme, it's the worst day of their life so far, right? You're calling them, You're telling them their baby's ugly. You're telling them stuff's broken. You're telling them it's their fault. When you're talking to the IT people, be professional and be graceful. One of the ways that we can be graceful and be kind to them is to come in with all of our IOCs and evidences ready to go, so that when we call them on the phone or we send them an email or whatever and we're talking to them, we say, hey, look, this is bad. Here's why it's bad, and here's all the evidences I have of it's bad. Instead of like, hey, we're getting funny stuff from this email and you guys might want to take a look. Nobody wants to hear that goofy stuff. Call them, tell them what you know, have everything ready, be the professional that you would want to contact you, and then agree on a traffic light protocol. It's usually a good idea to talk with them and let them know that you're not spreading this everywhere, but you may have obligations to inform people within your company and then business partners that you have or vendors that you have that you received the malicious content, anything along those lines. So let them know, be upfront with them. But overall, be a good cyber citizen. I can't tell you how often we call people and we have all that together and we go to talk with them and they thank us and they're appreciative, and we've helped alleviate a lot of stress because we're saying, hey, you're popped, but you're not doing this alone. Here's everything I've got, so that you already have a head start, because the threat actors already have a head start on them. Yeah, absolutely. Nate mentioned in chat, it's important to establish an email address outside of the primary domain. We talked about that early on in the preparation. If you're going to block the domain, obviously you can't continue email conversation with them. So it's at that point, once you contact them and you're providing them all the information that you have, that you establish a secondary means of contact, right? You agree, hey, we're going to use this Proton Mail, or hey, we're going to use whatever it is that you want to use that's not using the infrastructure that's contaminated potentially, so that you're not getting it on you, right? Let me see. There was something else there I wanted to bring up. I have a funny story for this one that I like to share here. And I'm going to use some business names. The business names are made up, but they get the point across. I had one of these where we had a business that we're going to call Hillside. And I called Hillside up and I said, hey, Hillside, you're sending me junk. It's definitely malicious, 100%. It's using one of your salesmen that we usually work with. It's using his account. Like, here's copies, here's headers, here's subject lines, hashes, everything. I gave him everything. I had a bow tied on it. It's beautiful. I sent it over to the guy and established a secondary means of contact, email him the stuff. And a few minutes later, the email bounces back. And he calls me back. And he says, hey, man, he says, we're not sending you this stuff. And I said, dude, you totally are. Like, I know it's sometimes it's hard to find. I'm trying to be nice. I'm like, you know, because I have all of the evidence to say that it's you. It's Hillside. And as I was talking to him on the phone with him for a little while, I started looking and I noticed that I had gotten that bounce back on my email where I tried to email him. And I'm like, hey, that secondary email you gave me didn't work. And it was related to the domain in some way, but it wasn't the same domain. So maybe a subdomain they had or something like that where they could receive mail. Anyway, and I call back out the email address to him, and he goes, no, that's not right. And I said, but you're Hillside, right? And he said, yeah. I started looking at it, and I put it into Microsoft Word, the email address that we had received the emails from, and I converted them to uppercase, and then shifted them back down to lowercase. And when I did, Hillside went from Hillside down to Hillside. And what the threat actor had done is they had went out, and I checked the age of the domain at that point. The threat actor had went out, and the week before, they had bought HIII side.com so that they could send emails from hillside.com using capital I's. And so on the display name that was coming through, everything looked like it was from Hillside. And when the DKIM, DMARC, and SPF records got checked, the computer was smart enough to check HIII side.com. And the threat actor had bothered to go out and register all their infrastructure, create DKIM records, create DMARC records. They had done everything right, set up good email infrastructure, so that even though it wasn't a real business email compromise, it looked like one to us. And so we got to all have a good laugh. He got to go and reach out to his registrar and get a takedown of that domain, and we got to move on. But be cognizant. Sometimes you're wrong, right? Sometimes they're wrong. Nobody wants to be told their baby's ugly, so show grace, have grace when you're working these. Any questions about contacting the source? I will say that I contact the source about 90% of the time, maybe a little bit higher, maybe closer to 95% of the time, whether we have a business relationship or not, if it passes DChem, DMARC, and SPF. The reason being that those indicators right there, that they've passed those, are almost always an indicator that the threat actor's in the mailbox, and not just spoofing or doing drive-bys or something like that, right? That they have actual larger issues that they need to be made aware of. Eradication, it's going to be similar. Oh yeah, our red team has used those Unicode spoofed URLs on us, Mike, and there's something else, especially like the Apple loading the Apple.com one and stuff. They know what they're doing. But this eradication, delete the emails, reset your user accounts, rebuild the mailboxes if you need to. This is all dependent on your risk profile, and it's the same stuff you do for phishing, right? If you believe that the user got popped, do what you need to eradicate that, to make sure that the attacker doesn't have a foothold in that environment. Does anybody, by a show of hands, like using the hands up thing, does anybody rebuild mailboxes? I've never seen anybody rebuild mailboxes. I see it. It's always given as a remediation step. Always hear it and see it, but I've never worked anywhere where they actually go and rebuild the mailboxes. Anybody? No. So, know your remediation. Know what you guys are willing to do. How much work you're willing to put into it. And then recovery. After your recovery, we're not going to establish mail flow. In the early stages where we blocked the domain and blocked the sender, we may have also torn down B2B tunnels or business to business like VPN tunnels. We may have taken out external SharePoint users to cut off their flow and access those ways. You want to reestablish that flow, but not until your partner has given you some kind of indication that they've actually done the work and that they've actually gotten rid of it. We've had a vendor in the past that I've worked with where we had to hold their feet to the fire and basically say, we're not turning this back on. We're not receiving email from your domain until you remediate that. And they came back and they were like, it's only 10 users and they're like traveling salesmen, and we just haven't had time to like get a hold of them and actually get their stuff remediated yet because they're on the road. And we were like, that's not a risk that we're willing to take, guys. We're sorry, but you know what? Those 10 guys need to be remediated. If they were part of it or if they weren't, either way, you endeavored to change all the passwords and do what you needed to do. You need to, follow through on your side of it. Next part is request IOCs from them. If they have the root cause of what happened, of how that mailbox got popped to begin with, you need that information. One, so that you can share it with other vendors and business partners and peers if it's relevant and if you have the traffic light protocol to be able to do so. And then two, so that your threat hunters can start hunting it in your own environment to look and see, are these coordinated attacks? Is this continuous attack? Is this persistent? And we need to step up our game and do something specifically about this threat actor group? Or did we just get hit because we were the flavor of the week? Something there that I feel like I needed to tell you guys and I don't remember it. Oh, TLP protocol. Are you guys familiar with traffic light protocol? Anybody? We got a thumb up. I'll assume you guys aren't, and I'm gonna show you really quickly. If you're not, and if you are, just ignore this part. CISA released a traffic light protocol similar to a classification scheme. It's pretty easy to use. It's just 4 colors. There's TLP red, which is not for disclosure. It's only whoever's participating, right? Yellow is going to be limited to people who need to know, like participants, organizations. So the person who got breached, you as having gotten breached, and maybe your vendors or peers that need to know. And then green is just going to be, we need to keep this in the community. So that might be like, I work in food and beverage, so I might want to share with other food and beverage vendors about the threats that are targeting us specifically in the food and beverage industry, but I might not want to put it on the nightly news. And then TLP white is everybody can know, anybody can know, post about it on Twitter, post about it on Reddit, let the world know what the threat actors are doing. There's also one that you don't see very often, which is TLP brown, and TLP brown is when you hear about it, you'll mess your pants. So use that how you will. let's go into lessons learned. Lesson learned, we're going to educate and re-educate our users. We're going to make sure that if they fell for one of these, that they know. If they didn't fall for one of these, we're going to use this opportunity to shine a light on it. Weekly meetings, monthly meetings, whatever, quarterlies. You're going to say, hey, we had X number of these this month. Remain vigilant. These are the kinds we're seeing. If you want to know more about it, reach out to us. All that kind of stuff. Continuing to build that relationship between your security department and your users so that they feel safe coming to you and sharing things with you and showing you things when they find stuff, shadow ITs or things in workflows or whatever that's going on. And then never waste a crisis. If you're not doing DMARC, SPF, and DKIM assessment today on incoming email, then do it. This is a perfect time. Never waste a crisis. And then update your points of contacts for vendors. I have my people who manage all of our vendor relationships. I go to the vendor relationship people. I say I need to talk to Bob's Tool Shack, whoever our person is over there, and they try and find them, and then they come back and say, oh, it turns out that the guy that was at Bob's Tool Shack, left during COVID, and we don't know who the replacement is. So you'll just have to call like the regular number and see what's going on. Nate mentioned this in chat. Nate's someone else that we work with. And yeah, absolutely. Some of our smaller vendors got to establish MFA because of one of these events. And so they came back to us and we said, hey, can we reestablish comms with you? And they said, no, actually, we're rolling out Microsoft Authenticator everywhere. We're going to get Microsoft Authenticator rolled out over the weekend. And then once we know everybody can MFA in, we'll let you know. We'll contact you via the secondary stream and let you know that you can turn back on Mailflow. And so just a good chance to take. And I hate to be crass and say never waste a crisis, but for real, strike while the iron's hot, whatever word you want to use. Go in there and get these things done as you're able to, and use that political capital to get it done. And let's talk about what happens if you're the sender of these. If you're the sender of the business email compromise, your domain's been compromised, one of your mailboxes has been compromised, there's a couple of things you can do. One, go ahead and have MFA in place for your user login. I'm not going to say it's not impossible for the bad guy to get in, because we know MFA bypass exists. We know that users sometimes are clicky. We call them clicky McClickerson. They'll respond to any MFA prompt they get, regardless of whether or not they should or need to. But it's better to have MFA and not need it than not have it and need it. Make sure your SPF records and your DKIM certificates are up to date so that your emails are going out and so that vendors can assess your email, so that business partners can be doing that assessment. Don't ask them to do something that you're not doing for your own domains. And then alert on new inbox rules. This has been a huge one for us as far as finding business email compromises, finding extortion attempts, finding financial scams, all kinds of stuff where you have this person get into the mailbox and then they do a couple of things. They'll usually set up a rule to mark things as read and then forward them to an off-domain email address, usually so that they can watch the mailbox and look for certain words. Or they'll go ahead and send out business email compromises to your vendors, right, from your infrastructure, from that mailbox, and they'll mark them as read. They'll mark responses to those emails as read and move them into a default folder or the new folder. The one that I see most often is the RSS feeds. I don't know whose playbook that's written into. I don't know what threat actor or what initial access broker has that in their playbook, but somebody's telling them to do it because it's too consistent. They'll put it in the RSS feeds. Most of the time your users are probably not even using the RSS feeds folder. They probably don't know it exists, and they're probably definitely not marking their own emails as read and stuffing them in the RSS feeds folder. Users surprise me all the time, so I'm sure you'll find that unicorn, but that's the way it goes most of the time. Any questions there? Exchange has that assessment for you built in, and if you're sending your MDO or Microsoft Defender for Outlook alerts to Defender for Endpoint, those MDO alerts will actually populate in the MDE console where your analysts are probably working all day anyway. It actually pulls the email rule in and gives them all the details. It tells them when it was created, the name of the rule, any folders that it touches, any forwarding addresses that are set up, and what the conditions of the rule that were created were. And so Microsoft's made it very, very easy for you to very quickly assess that and go, oh yeah, that's John shoving emails from whatever automated reporting software we have into the reporting bucket versus that sends everybody's email or that person's email all out to a Yahoo address and keeps a copy of all incoming emails in the RSS feeds. So pay attention to those. They've made it very, very frictionless for you to get those rules, assess them, and figure out and find evil. Any questions there? Okay. Identifying it. Here's how you find out that you're sending out these malicious emails, right? Have a publicly accessible reporting mechanism. Talked about how frustrating it is to go and look and try and find a way to get a hold of somebody. You're going to get spam email if you create an abuse email, but create something. Put it in your robots.txt. Put it in your security.txt. If you're not familiar with that, there's an RFC that you can search for, RFC security.txt, that you can create. It's got specific things that need to go in there. One of them is how to contact you about reporting for abuse for your domain that's not just the usual abuse at domain.com. But find some way to make it easy for the public and for vendors and other people to get a hold of your internal security team so that they can tell you when these bad things are happening. Also, once you find one of these, start looking for anomalous logins. We often see that the threat actors don't take the time to change VPNs or change source IPs. Once they get into a mailbox or multiple mailboxes, they'll keep the same VPN connection and they'll just jump between the mailboxes as they visit them, right? So they're not looking at John's mailbox, then tearing down their VPN, standing it back up, getting a new IP, and then looking at the next one and doing that whole mess. They usually just hit them one after another and start going through them, or they have maintained sessions on those. So take a look for those anomalous logins, one IP address logging into multiple inboxes. Again, if you have Custo query language, if you're using advanced hunting and MDE, or you're using Splunk or something like that, all of those will be able to build you tables of who's connecting to what from where and allow you to see when there's multiple instances tied to one thing, whether you're just using something as simple as a count or you're actually doing like big data analytics on your data lake of source IPs and that kind of stuff. Another one's collect outgoing mail samples and mail flow. We usually see that even though when we're the recipient of a business email compromise, that it only hits a few of our users. When we're the source of a business email compromise, it's usually hit every vendor, customer, and peer that mailbox has previous email with. So what we'll see all of a sudden is Bob sends a couple of emails every now and then, right? 1, 2, 5, something like that. And then for some reason, in like a couple hour period, all of a sudden Bob emails every person that he's ever emailed in the history of ever. And so you see this spike that shoots up in the data where all of a sudden you're able to say, hey, that doesn't look right. Exchange has those rules built in as well. You can configure them and you can go in there and see exactly what's going on and figure out, where the bad guys are and where you're most likely popped at that point. And then follow your internal notification protocols. There's probably a CISO, an incident manager, a legal department, other people who are going to be interested to know if you've been breached. You may have government contracts or government requirements that make you report a breach depending on the severity of it. Make sure that you're following those notification protocols, that you're letting people know. There's one thing that will put me into a rage like immediately, and I have to tamper that and just like stick it in my nightmare box for later. And that's calling someone and telling them, especially if they're an established vendor, calling them and telling them, hey, we're getting malicious emails from you. And they go, oh yeah, we know. Yeah, my nightmare box. That's the box that I go and scream into and then just fold it up and set it in the corner for later, for when I finally snap. That makes me literally insane. I cannot stand to contact somebody and them go, yeah, we know that you got malicious emails from me. If you know that I got malicious emails from us, tell us. Let somebody know. Hell, email the guy that you sent the malicious emails to originally from the popped mailbox and tell him. Just let somebody know. Don't leave us in the dark. So I know you've got obligations. I know you've got technical obligations and legal obligations, but you also have moral obligations. So do the thing that you want somebody to do for you. Contact them and let them know, right, that you've been popped. And then start collecting your IOCs for partner notification. When you send those notifications, just like if somebody contacts you and tells you your baby's ugly, When you call them up, have a picture of the baby ready to go so that they know what ugly baby they're looking for, so that you can tell them, hey, this is what we sent you. This is where we see it. This is the sandbox information we were able to get. And then contain and eradicate. Remove your user's access. Rebuild mailboxes if you need to. Get your IOCs cleaned up into a publishable form. And then this is one of my favorites. Report to open source. I've had people warn me against this, and this is a two-edged sword. You should be reporting to open source, because when you report to open source, there's all kinds of automations and software that's helping keep the world safe that's immediately going to be alerted once something gets dropped into VirusTotal or PhishTank or one of these other open source CTI repositories, right? Or threat intelligence repositories. And yeah, the bad guys are going to know. But if that means the bad guys have to go and tear down their infrastructure, it's not hurting my feelings, right? They have to go and build more infrastructure. That's their problem. I need to keep them busy anyway, because they make my life hard, so it's my turn. Report them to open source. The one caveat of that is to make sure it's actually malicious. Don't just chunk everything that Clicky McClickerson sends to your phishing box into the fish tank and mark it as evil, right? Do your due diligence. Pop it over to a junior analyst. Get an intern. Find somebody. Teach them how to do this. You'll be better for having taught them, and they'll be better for having learned it. Make sure it's actually malicious, and make sure it's not business sensitive. There's a couple of times when we've had them take and send us back our own attachments, but our own attachments made malicious. And the reason why you can't take that attachment and just kick it up into VirusTotal is those attachments have had our financial information in them. They've had confidential sales information, numbers around business information. I happen to work for a private organization, so we're not publicly traded. We don't do the same financial disclosures that other companies may be required to do. And they just had all of our business in that Excel document that they were sending back and forth. The bad guy went in, found that in the sent mail folder, put that malicious content in there, and then popped it back over to us. If our analysts had taken that and shoved it up into VirusTotal, somebody else could have pulled that document down and then had all of our business information. So know that just about anything that you put into an open source repository is going to be recoverable by somebody, usually by the community at large, so that they can investigate it and do reporting and all that kind of stuff on it. So know that. Nate commented in chat and said, run it by legal first. Yeah, absolutely. Some people are like super sensitive about it. I think, and Nate may correct me later if I'm wrong, I think our decision making is pushed to the individual analyst, and so it's your job as the analyst to look at it and know if it's malicious before you use any third-party software to do any assessment of it. I've also noticed that I misspelled malicious when I was modifying the slides earlier today, so don't come at me. I'll fix that before I push it up to the GitHub. And then see if you can locate your initial access and remediate. If you were the source of it, it's very important that you stop sending that stuff out. But also, your job's not done. Just because you've remediated that mailbox, you need to go back and take a look at that mailbox and figure out exactly what happened and how that person got in, how that threat actor gained that foothold in the mailbox, because it's likely they weren't the only person to get popped. You may have other users that got popped the same way, and they just haven't started abusing their mailbox yet. Questions on containing, eradicating, or reporting to open source, getting your IOCs together, anything like that? Cool. Lessons learned, educate your users, keep your SPF records up to date. Again, that doesn't stop business email compromises, but it helps. And then work with your vendors. Set up plans of action ahead of time. Get your executive tabletops done. All the things that we've talked about throughout here. Have MFA. Start doing that threat hunting. If you have the resources and the capabilities to set up something that can just run those reports every now and then and look for bad and pull those things down, it's really low effort to get you something that can help you prevent some pretty bad stuff. And then I've got this quick demo if you guys want to see it, if we have time. Do we have time for a quick demo, guys?
Yeah, we have time.
Okay, cool. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. I'm going to change screens over here. Let me see, since I lost my OBS Studio, I'm going to try and do it on this other screen here so it's not as large when I go to share it. See if I can get you guys hooked up here. So this is a live version of Logo Kit that I was able to pull. And so let's see if I can share this screen. Perfect. Can you guys see screen one?
We can see it. It
Awesome.
has Burp Suite.
Yep, that's it. All right, cool. So this is the contents of an attachment that we got that came in, and you can see it's just got a bunch of obfuscated nonsense in there. There's not really a lot for me to work off of, and even if you put this into like CyberChef or something to try and decode this, or you pass it over to some of your Java guys and ask them to unminify it, usually it's so obfuscated that the automated systems won't really do it or do a good job into something that makes sense again. You'll end up with a bunch of variable names that don't make any sense and that kind of stuff. In those cases, I always turn to my trusty Burp Suite because I know Burp Suite can get me a copy of it and let me get a copy of it safely. So we're going to take and I've modified this one. It originally had one of our actual users in here, and you can see the website that they were using. This was Ryzen Bookkeeping at the time, and we're going to try and pull up a phishing page for Bob at Pepsi.com. So if you have Burp Suite, you're going to go to the proxy. You're going to make sure you open the browser so you have the Burp Suite proxy here, and then you're going to make sure your intercept is turned on. Should have the red light that allows you to stop the flow of traffic and keeps you from submitting bad stuff when you don't mean to. And we're going to go ahead and open it over here, and our intercept, perfect, is going to show us right off the bat that we're trying to pull some jQuery. Sounds normal. Lots of websites use jQuery. I'm going to go ahead and forward that one. And then we're going to see a call to logo.clearbit.com. If you remember early on, I told you that logo.clearbit.com was one of the big IOCs to know that you were dealing with Logo Kit. You can see here that there's no branding on this 365 page prior to this request being sent through. But if I go ahead and send it, because Clearbit itself isn't dangerous, it's going to go ahead and pull the name of the domain. And then if I let it make the second call, it'll actually go ahead and brand the page. So I was really impressed by this. The threat actors had actually found a way that they could, on the fly, generate phishing kits that matched the victim domain that they were dealing with. And what do? We tell our users don't log into 365 pages that don't have our logo on it. And so the threat actors know that, and what do? They turn around and build a phishing kit that has our logo on it. How do you make sure you get everybody's logo? You go to Logo Kit, or you go to Clearbit, and you use their repository of thousands and thousands of logos to start building these. Let me show you one more thing. What we do from here generally is we'll go ahead and put in a password. I'll just put in nonsense 123 and like an exclamation point, and click sign in. And when we go back over here, we're going to see, I want to drop these jQueries because I don't actually need them. As I drop through one of these, there it is. You should be able to see down here, somebody who's got voice if you don't care to respond. Can you guys see here where they transmitted this post to RyzenBookkeeping.com and our passwords down here in plain text? I got a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So now you know that Ryzen Bookkeeping in this case was actually where they were hosting their phishing kit. And then you can also actually see where the credentials were being gathered. Lots of times those won't be the same. And that's that IOC that I was talking about early on to be able to identify if your user actually gave up their credentials. So that's my piece. I appreciate you guys letting me present tonight. I'll drop to questions now if there are any. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Get a mic.
What you got, Mike?
Okay, so at one point I asked about crypto, PKI, and using it to thwart the attacker spoofing a business-looking mail to you, telling you, hey, here's my B2B, accounting thing. Here's my new order, or here's my report, or whatever.
Sure.
And what I meant by that was that the data itself, the attachments that might be malware or might be something else, but are spoofed and have your data in them, if that's encrypted, the person rummaging through your email systems got nothing, because assuming that they don't have the keys to your your encryption system as a common enterprise level I've got everything key. And I've
Gotcha.
always had a problem with crypto systems for the entire enterprise where key management has everything. Because if you get a master key or whatever, you've got everything now. You can get in, you can see the keys, which key is used, and just take everything. But if you only are spoofing the email system and not spoofing the data, then can't attachments that are decrypted, can't you immediately detect that they're not valid? Right?
So this attack that we're talking about mostly depends on them not spoofing anything. They're logging into, like, if you have O365 exposed on the internet, or you're allowing users to log in through webmail and those kind of things, they're logging into the actual email system as the user. So whatever the user experience is, that's what the attacker's experience is. The one place where I could see where that would be beneficial, you're discussing like encrypting the individual mailbox. Proton Mail actually does this. If you're familiar with Proton Mail, they're essentially a bulletproof host in Sweden or Switzerland.
Yeah.
And when you log into Proton Mail, it actually asks you for the key to your mailbox. So you authenticate with your username and password, and then upon providing that key, it decrypts the mailbox contents in your browser on your local system.
Right.
Yeah, that would absolutely be an effective mitigation against this. If you were using Proton Mail or using something similar to that, where the user had a known value, attackers aren't going to be able to use you to send mail. It's not going to change the recipients of that mail because email by itself is not encrypted.
So the reason I'm not a advocate for or even very knowledgeable on the zero trust concept, but my basic understanding of it is trust. It's like the X-Files, trust no one. So you basically assume that your system is hacked, your devices are hacked, your end users are hacked, them could be insiders and what have you, and treat everybody as if they could be spoofing the system or trying to do something malicious on the system. If you treat everything as a bad actor and start asking some questions, then you won't take a link from an email and click on it.
Right. Exactly.
Period. No links from an email. Which if somebody from your bank says that you need to do something quick, and they get you excited enough, you may click on something. But you really should think. Every time you go to click on something, a link in the email, and I have this really annoying extension to Chrome that when I'm in my, especially Gmail, and I click on a bunch of stuff that looks benign to me, and that I don't know the sender, I just click on the links. It always gives me this warning, and I have to really pound it to get through the warning levels, because there's usually 2 or 3 different warning levels, and it can tell what bad form is, and it says, hey, this is bad form, or we already know this website. If it tells me that it knows the website is malicious, that's the end of it, right? But if it tells me, oh, it's using a filter and we don't like this filter on the the URL and various things, then you can decide, just like if you've got an expired SSH certificate, you can decide whether you want to pound through that or not.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, too many websites still have broken stuff in their official domain, because they're just too lazy to fix stuff instantaneously, I guess. They go a week or.
So to caveat on that, we actually have had this experience where when we started doing DMARC and DKIM and SPF assessment and dropping emails, where vendors came back and they said, you're rejecting all of our mail. And we said, yeah, your DMARC's broken. Like, fix your DMARC and we'll start
Yeah,
taking your mail again. And they said, well, you need to fix your infrastructure. And I said, no, our infrastructure is fine. Your infrastructure is broken. Like, they didn't understand.
exactly.
You're the problem. So I'm not taking your sick, ugly baby. Do not send it to me. Stop. And they're like,
Yeah.
we can't send you business emails. And I'm like, that's absolutely a you problem. You know, and
Well,
we're
and
kind about it, obviously, and professional, but I'm not going to tear down my security controls because you can't get it
Justin,
together.
it sounds like you and I know all the people at ISSA FFB are, military backgrounds. And when you have that military background or you have, a very long term in industry and stuff, you're used to, crossing I's and dotting T's. And you have to do it. You have to do all the pain in the ass stuff that keeps you safe,
Yeah.
and because you just know that you have to do it. And the people who say, hey, come on, let us slide, are the people that haven't lost thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, right?
Yep. Yeah. I've seen one of these business email compromises easily cost, uh, I, I don't know, 50, $80,000, somewhere in there, depending on how much fallout actually went into it. If you took into account, and that was just off one email, right?
Yeah.
Somebody used a fake thing and sent a thing, and then that money was just gone, right?
So
Um,
did your talk has been basically, the second question I have is, your talk is basically about B2B relationships. And I'm wondering about, what about massive B2C relationships like Discover Card and, major banks and things like that. If somebody tried to apply some of these technologies, does it is it a fit apply? Like, can they spoof emails that that look good to the end user,
I
a
got you.
customer that has no education on what not to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see there's a current bank um, phishing kit that's going around that's emulating Citibank.
Yeah,
It's really good, and they've done a lot of work on using um, lookalike domains that are really close to Citibank that make it hard on first glance to realize that it's not Citibank. One of them actually had such high turnaround that when we were researching it, we were finding legitimate emails from Citibank. And what the threat actor had done is they had gotten a legitimate copy of a Citibank email, put their stuff into it, and then immediately blasted it out.
right.
So you had the Citibank email, and then you had the fake Citibank email going out almost on top of each other, which made them very hard to delineate between the two and figure out exactly what was going on. I would say that most of the business email compromise stuff that you're going to be able to deal with um, is going to be related to having a trust relationship, and your customer probably trusts you, but shouldn't, right? So your customer shouldn't be expecting it if it's an informal customer relationship, if it's sales and those kind of things. When I was speaking of customers, I was thinking about us in the food and beverage delivery business. I'm in the middle. I'm a supplier, so one of my customers is not Joe Bob off the street. My customer is like Golden Gallon gas station or Weigel's or whatever, right? And I work with that. Our people work with that Weigel's and have an established relationship with that Weigel's as a customer. And we sell beer and Coke and all kinds of different food and beverage type things, right? Or sodas, you know. And so we sell them that stuff. They're used to communicating and doing orders with us. On the back end, we're also buying um, uh, syrup or cases of beer or whatever from whoever our vendors are along the way. So when I say B2B, I'm usually talking about the upstream vendor that I'm purchasing from, that I'm their customer. And then when I say customers, I'm usually talking about those established relationships I have where I'm a continuous supplier. It may be different in your industry or in your enterprise. And all these may not apply, right? I guess is the caveat.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks again. I echo Nate's sentiment. Great presentation and lots of excellent detail and information. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely glad to share, and I appreciate the commentary and the back and forth so that we can both grow from it. Anybody else have any other questions or anything that they want to share or clarifications? I'm getting some thumbs up. I'm going to take that as a hook, taking me off the stage, and I'm out.
Justin, thanks again for coming and talk to us tonight. It was such a great presentation, as always. Carlos, do you need to talk any admin things?
What a great presentation.
All right, nothing heard. So everybody, again, just want to say thanks again for coming out and, well, coming out virtually, of course, and come listen to my friend talk about this topic. So hope you guys all have a great night and hope to see you at the next virtual meetup that we have.
Thanks all. Thanks, Mark, for having me. I appreciate everybody.
All righty, everybody, have a great night.